11th, although I believe a lot of us have read the UK versions, which have been out for at least a year, because I bought that in the spring, volume 3 last spring, right before everything got shut down. So anyways, I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Hello, Chad.
Atlanta Dennison out there taking away voting rights from people who deserve it.
Absolutely, man. We can't let people decide what's going on.
No.
Not cool.
Not cool. And our special guest this week is Derek Maine. And Derek, I have questions for you, but first I want to premise that we're trying something new with this season, in which every guest that comes on, we're going to try for most of them, that the guests who come on for volume 1 will also come on for volume 2 and volume 3. So you can track like your reactions across the 3 parts of the trilogy. Because it's not like they're like completely separate, but there's like an arc overall. And it'd be interesting to see how people react to it as time goes on and more of the pieces fall in place and more of the stuff develops. So
yeah, it's gonna be cool to reread it too. You know, I mean, I read it in a feverish, like as soon as I got through 1, I went and got the British versions, which were already out, you know, and like just boom, 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 you know, like binge read it really. So it's gonna be nice to like, you know, kind of do it a little more slowly.
Oh, I read them as I got them, which is like months apart. So it was like it was a bit frustrating by the third one where it's like, I kind of remember what this person's name and deal is, but not entirely, because there's so many characters by the end. And they do have the recap pages in volume 2 and 3 of like, here's where our characters were at the end of the last volume, but that doesn't cover everyone. And it's always like, oh yeah, that's right, that's what was happening, but this person had a whole history before that moment that I forget. So yeah, so how did you come to these books, Derek? And what's your general feeling about them?
I may have come through the translator. I mean, Frank Wynn is somebody who I feel like when he comes out with stuff, I mean, does he do 4 languages or something like obscene, you know? I think I had just seen, you know, that he was working on this like kind of punk book. Like I knew there was some like musical angle. And I mean, I grew up like starting at age 14, my parents would drop me off at downtown Winston-Salem, where I was from, to the punk shows. And from that point till, you know, my mid-20s, I played in bands, I did tours. That was like the scene I was in. So I read it like for that, like wanting that aspect of it, you know, because I was really curious, like how different it would be through like a Parisian's eye, you know what I mean? Like how different was it? And it turned out to be another generation. They were probably 10 years older than me, right? I mean, do you think Vernon's supposed to be like late 40s?
Yeah, in like 2012-ish, right?
Okay, all right, yeah.
At some point in time, I thought I figured out like the year, and it's like some years. He'd be like my age-ish, but years ago.
Yeah, like the music drops are about 8 to 10 years earlier than my, you know, generation, whatever.
Except for like the Riot Girl stuff. The Riot Girl stuff was like right in my college years, like L7 and all those people. But I don't know, Brian. Did you know anything about Virginie Despentes?
Absolutely nothing. As always, I am the idiot that shows up and just asks all the idiot questions and surrounded by smart people that have read and know things. And I'm the idiot. And I like it. That's right. That's right in my wheelhouse. So
I realized as we were signing on here that I'm not certain I pronounced her name right, and I'm definitely not certain I can pronounce all the book titles correctly. And I'm gonna just pop to that right away. But so she's been writing for a number of years. But her big book, the first big breakthrough book, and this is the one I don't want to pronounce, is Vice Moi. I'm not sure. Someone who's French explained it to me, in which it was written about. Like Virginie Despentes was a sex worker for a time, and she writes about it in King Kong Theory, which has been retranslated by Frank Wynn and is coming out in May as well. And I read last weekend and was absolutely floored by. But she talks about her being a sex worker at this point in time in, I guess, the 80s, 90s in France. And there's a story that she had of like where her and her girlfriend were hitchhiking, and these 3 guys picked them up and like raped them at gunpoint. And this book / movie is taking that and having like, it has like a revenge sort of plot to it of the women like fucking and killing their way through Paris or through France, I guess. And what's interesting about it was made by a former porn star and starred other female porn actresses, and it got banned in France. They banned it for obscenity and for being pornography. And she writes about that in there too, of like how crazy it is that like that's banned, but like it's not like it's protecting people from porn or protecting people from anything. But she's a really interesting figure in King Kong Theory in particular. Really interesting kind of take on feminism that's more in like that Kathy Acker vein, but also
it sounds like kind of like reminds me of like second wave coming out of San Francisco, like sex positive second wave feminism, like
sex positive for sure, and violence.
Yeah,
that violence is. There's one part in there where she's like, you know, if you're a woman and you're going out in the world, you have to expect that someone's going to want to rape you, and you can't hide from that. You just have to be ready to fuck them up if need be, kind of. So it's yeah, it is more in that vein, which I think we were talking about this before we went live, of like how these books are going to be received, or her books have been received, because she has other novels like Bye Bye Blondie, Pretty Things. I really, really love Pretty Things. And I feel like I'm skipping one that it's not coming to me right now. Apocalypse Baby. Apocalypse Baby is really fantastic as well. And they have like good following, like a cult following, but like this seems primed for her to like just be a big, huge breakout star, because it moved unfortunately from feminist press to FSG. I like the feminist press sort of aesthetic behind them and what they're doing with the books and their support, but FSG clearly has more marketing power and more marketing money. So she should be like a big deal. And yet the first two books like kind of came and went a little bit. And I'm hoping that this podcast can help bring a lot more readers to her, or at least the people who are championing her have a place to like really bring it home, because these books I think are fantastic and are really interesting construction and really interesting voice and are offensive in their way. Like at various times, very offensive.
Because it was on the Man Booker list, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think
that's where I recall first seeing it. Like
that. It's so interesting because that thing has so much cachet, and yet like 2 years afterwards, I'm like, I don't remember a single book that was on any list whatsoever.
I also think, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I mean, most of my friends out there and stuff are not big book readers, but of course they know I'm whatever. So they're asking like, what should I read? This is probably my most recommended book the last 2-3 yeast. Like that's the other area where I think that it could like be quite a bit. I mean, this is not JR, right? Like last season, you know what I mean? Where, I mean, I love it. But you need to be a particular type of taste in person, probably. You know, this has got a broad potential appeal because of the music angle and because of the politics are just, they're now.
They are now. It's weird how now they are. I mean, it is the sort of setup, not to give away too much of it, but is that Vernon Subutex is a former record store owner, was involved with all those different like punk movement, the different bands, was kind of like the guru of that kind of moment, the way that you could be as a record store owner at that period of time. And now that all imploded, he's like shit down on his luck, basically homeless, gets evicted, as we'll talk about in this first section. And there's kind of two threads, like what he does and how he related to this one rock star and this one rock star's tapes, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then like the rise of extremism in France. And those two things like crash together, and that does feel much more now. That's why I think the books are set in an earlier period, but like it doesn't feel too distant because the ideas and the sort of reactions that people have are very current. The thing that I love about her, before we even jump into like my big thing with this book in particular, is how each little section is a different person, is a different character. There's not really an omniscient character. It's more like a mosaic of these first person points of view that intersect and are much more like, she refers to it in an interview as being more like a television series, that she thinks television's kind of replaced cinema. And this is like a television series. And it really does run with that energy. But each one of these people is so direct. The writing about them is so honest, is so frank. And they're like flawed, fucked up in their own weird ways. Nobody's like a perfect character or like irreproachable. Everyone's like got these like weird aspects to their personality or their beliefs or things that they failed at or tried at or their angers or whatever. And I love that. Like everyone's a little warty in the book, and that makes it like really compelling. And also like some of these lines just hit home. Especially I remember in volume 3, a lot of the stuff about women and marriage. I was like, oof, this is tight. this is right there. But anyways, so yeah, Brian, you don't even have the books.
What's that?
You don't even have the books.
I went online and I did the look inside feature on our good friend Amazon has, and I did the free preview. So I read 24 pages of the beginning of it. And Kai was so nice to send me a free Audible book, and so I listened to the beginning part of it as well, which is kind of weird having a British dude read the. Imagine like this like down on his luck, end of his rope, French burnout dude with this British guy. It's kind of an interesting experience. I don't normally listen to books on tape or anything, so
yeah, books on tape.
Really wild and that's how old I am. I call it books on tape. I'm really hip with it, obviously.
Check out the CDs and the tapes from my my library.
And my car literally has a factory installed tape player. Like that's all right. Like if there was an EMP, my car would still work. It's dangerous as hell. You're gonna die in it, but it'll survive electromagnetic pulse. I'll be fine. The rest of you are screwed with your GPS or whatever. I got my tape player and my drum brakes. I'm fine.
Well, what did you think, Brian, of the first 24 pages?
I liked it quite a bit. I really liked the in-depth kind of desire that you feel and the connection you get with Vernon right from the beginning. It really hooks you in and wraps you into that. Oddly enough, the beginning of this, it reminded me a lot of how I got hooked to the character in Conrad's Lord Jim. It's like a really weird comparison. It doesn't make any sense at all. It was like the first thing that I thought of when I was reading this. So like I'll just for fun, I'll read the first paragraph of this, and I'll read the first paragraph of Lord Jim. And maybe it's just me, but like there's this way of it's such a captivating character. The windows of the building opposite are already lit. The silhouettes of cleaning women bustle around the vast open plan office of what is probably an advertising agency. They start work at 6. Vernon usually wakes up just before they arrive. He aches for a strong coffee, a yellow filtered cigarette. He would like to make a slice of toast and eat breakfast while scanning the headlines of Le Parisien on his laptop. It has been weeks since he last bought coffee. The cigarettes he rolls every morning by gutting the cigarette butts from the night before are so skinny, it's like puffing on paper. There is nothing to eat in the cupboards, but he has kept up the payments to his internet provider. So like right off the bat, I just love the energy and the momentum of like just kind of like this slow pan on this simple character. It really hooked me. And so here's the first couple lines of an oldie but a goodie, Lord Jim, chapter 1. He was an inch, perhaps 2, under 6 feet, powerfully built, and he advanced straight at you with a slight stoop of his shoulders, head forward, and a fixed from under stare which made you think of a charging bull. His voice was deep, loud, and his manner displayed a kind of dogged self-assertion, which had nothing aggressive in it. It seemed a necessity, and it was directed apparently as much at himself as anybody else. He was spotlessly neat, apparelled in immaculate white from shoes to hat, and in the various eastern ports where he got his living as ship chandler's water clerk, he was very popular. There's just something absolutely captivating about both of those characters right from the jump. And I thought, in this one in particular, it was just brilliant how she just sucked me into this flawed, kind of terrible person, all the terrible things happening to him. Like, but it's not dramatic at all. Like, you know, if I were to try to do this, it'd be so melodramatic and terrible. You'd be like, bullshit, and toss it. But the way she does it, like, it's just spot on. I loved it.
It's really the thing I love about that too, or that makes it ring true to me, is that none of the characters are really glamorized. It is like they're past their prime and are aware that shit didn't quite work out right, except for Alexander. Is it Alexander? What's his last name?
I always call it Bleach in my head, but that's not
Alexandra Bleach, who was successful. And did make a bunch of money and is like keeping Vernon alive. And at the beginning of this dies, or is found dead in like a hotel room. So he's the only one of their group that seems to have really been successful. Everyone else seems to have like had mixed mixed things. And that's what really stands out to me from like the perspective of what makes them so compelling to read, is that they are that like past. They're past. They're not like the 20-year-old kids who are like gonna make the change and like, break through and that kind of like millennial energy. It's much more of this like wearied, like, yeah, I'm 45 now and I don't have a record store and can't pay for my rent. And none of my friends really want to take me in because I kind of fucked that up like one by one along the way. So, yep, here we are. But you didn't even get any of the other characters. You only got him.
Him and like all of his friends dying, basically.
Yeah.
Like he's like the last of an age or of a time, like CDs, like the idea that you sell CDs for more and they're cheaper to make, or Napster, or it's just free, like discovering this thing called eBay and how, wow, you could actually sell stuff for a lot on that. Or like, just this idea of everything is changing and maybe he hasn't yet. And then his friends are dying. And like, there's just nothing but kind of like this strange regret of what is left, what's going on.
I love, like, to sum that up, like there's this great part on 18 and 19 where he's like, he stayed home. He was grateful for the times he lived in. He binged on music, on TV box sets, on movies, gradually stopped listening to the radio. Since the age of 20, his first reflex when he woke up in the morning was to turn it on. Now he found it disturbing without being interesting. He had gotten out of the habit of listening to the news. He had stopped watching television almost without realizing. He was too busy on the internet. He would glance at the headlines, but he spent most of his time on porn sites. He didn't want to think about the crisis, about Islam, climate change, fracking, ill-treated orangutans, about refugees getting chucked off of buses. His little bubble is snug. He can survive if he holds his breath. He reduces every gesture to its bare minimum. He eats less. That sort of captures that for me, of like that despair and like the precision of it. Her sort of like list making is fun.
That hits a little close to home too, like.
Yeah, there's a lot of hitting a little close to home in this book.
Yeah. It's interesting though you said success, because he runs into someone later and he actually makes a comment about, like, internal monologue comment about success, that his generation, it didn't matter like having things or making the money or whatever. It was basically like, could you get laid? Did you have good taste in music? Like, did you know the right party to go to? Like, that's what the social currency was. And he kind of makes a point that the newer generation, it's all about what you have,
Yes.
as opposed to experiences. There's definitely an aspect of that, because Vernon's still kind of cool in the same way, that he always was.
And he will be I don't want to give anything away. But his coolness is legit too, I think.
Well, I mean, coolness, when I was told, like, it's about not caring, not trying. And that's why I can't be cool, right? Because I'm trying too hard. I want everybody to like me, all that stuff. But like Vernon does have a genuine, I mean, it seems like, not laissez-faire attitude or whatever towards life. And that seems real. And that is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. The section that you're talking about too is like, it's the one where he's trying to pick up the barista, right? Or the woman from the bar.
Yeah, it's the one who's the daughter. She
Yeah.
came into his store when she was like my daughter's age, like 7 or something.
Right.
Her dad was a heavy metal obsessed cop. Yeah.
And Scientologist.
And Scientologist, yeah. There's every single character she suffuses with some sort of like that weirdness or element. Like, there's nobody who's just like, oh, this is the most normal person you've ever met. Like, there's always like these idiosyncrasies that then like kind of, she uses the characters as a way to examine those, I think, and to examine society, and does it really well. So even the cop, of course, like has to be a Scientologist. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
briefly mentioned, but like that's plugged in there too,
It is like she is like the master of like all of the writing tools of like how you can define someone in like a sentence. Like, her sentences are like, boom, I've got it. I know who this person is.
Like the concrete details with Severine, the one that got away, I thought was just so wonderful. Like, wow, what a cool lady. Like, I want to date this person. Like, the way she described like how just cool she was with like just the little details of, like, she was like rich and powerful and will just take care of things and not complain about it. Or she keeps her record player by the bed, and so she doesn't get out of bed and change records, and like it's just really cool little details of like or someone owns a blanket that has so many burn holes in it from spliffs that it looks like it's part of the pattern. Like just little tiny things. Like, oh, I know that person. Yeah, I went to college with somebody like that. There's perfect little concrete details that hold so much weight, and just like boom, got it. Like 2 little brush strokes, got it. Love it.
There's one of those things that kind of comes through overall is like a very interesting and nuanced vision of what the world is. That it's not like there's not like one agenda. She has like an agenda, I suppose, but there's not like an agenda that feels like it's being pushed. It feels like there's all these characters that are reacting to this overall bad system and are each being like hampered in different ways. And like their reactions are interesting. I remember very distinctly from Pretty Things. This is like this is the moment where I was like, I will read any of her books. I'll go wherever. It was towards the end of Pretty Things where this woman, long story, but she's like imitating her sister. Her twin sister has become like a pop star that took over like for her sister who dies. And nobody really knows. And she's hanging out with this guy who's one of the other main characters, and they're playing video games. And he remarks that like every time she loses, she blames herself, whereas men know that every time you lose, it's because the video game fucked you. And it's like
controller. I always had a problem with the controller.
Like Aiden's like goddamn controller, but it's like the internalization of that perspective of that sort of panopticon thing of like, oh, it's my fault, and like the women have that come up, and like you could make that like a very explicitly sort of like feminist critique of society, but it's in there in this way that's like much more meaningful than that to me, and it's reflected in so many different places in real life and in her books that I dig her, and I dig that aspect to it. It's also funny. I also think she's super funny.
Yeah, I mean, she gets in so many different. I mean, Brian, you only saw the Vernon thing. Like that beginning you opened, for every character gets that treatment.
Yep.
And so maybe 30 total across 3 books. Like, and the next one coming up, Xavier, is one of the most fun to sort of like analyze. But she's able to like see the world through so many different characters and in what feels like a completely authentic and real way that I don't even know anyone in my life that has that skill set. You know what I mean? That like usually like, you know, whatever side of whatever thing you're on, it's like, it's hard to empathize, you know, you're just like, whereas I feel like she can write a book about Charleston from like, or like whatever, like from the perspective of Proud Boys or whatever. And it would sound like reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. We did it like sort of like subtle critique, especially of female sexuality. On like page 9, even when we're talking about the Severine, the woman that got away, he's like, he cheats on her and he gets caught. And he's like, he was surprised that she did not dump him then and there. She said, I'll leave it to you, and forgiven him. And then when he finds out that she's seeing someone else, he stuffed her things in a cardboard box and left them downstairs on the sidewalk. And that sort of like contradiction between like female sexuality and male sexuality and like promiscuity is like it fits Vernon's character. It fits within there without being preachy. It doesn't even call attention to itself. It's really masterful how she weaves these things together. I'm always blown away. But like even like right away, one of the funny, like simple but funny joke is the drawback of karma theory was that if there was even a grain of truth in the notion that, quote, what goes around comes around, people would have long since stopped being assholes. Fun.
I don't know if this will play out or not, but I like the fact too, just rereading that, that, you know, he would keep doing it, and she's screaming at him like, if you keep doing this, you're going to leave me no choice, until she has to make the choice and end it for him.
Yes.
You know, it's the typical like wimpy male thing where I'll just screw something up until they make the choice for me, so I don't have to do it.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I'll ruin my life, but I can always blame them because I'm not the one that like. It's blaming the video game controller again, right? It's not the game. It's not you playing the game. It's the controller or whatever.
Yep.
So I wonder if that's going to play out at all with his life falling apart. But I think that's a really cool, another one of those really neat little details that she just put in there is the way that he ruined it with the woman of his dreams.
Yeah. And the ways that like Vernon gets what he deserves in some ways. Because he isn't like, he is cool, but he's not perfect, like you say. He's kind of a bad person at times. Like he's
completely stuck in another era. I mean, that's like the biggest thing I think you say about him. Like initially you meet him and you're like, God, he's one of those guys who, like, we used to joke about, like, where I'm from, the football players who their best life was, you know, when they were 16 or whatever in high school. I mean, Vernon, it's 1998 and he's at a club or whatever, and everyone knows him. Like, so there's not often a lot of, she's able to do that without being nostalgic. Do you know what I mean? Like, the writing itself is not nostalgic, while the people are obviously very much, as you said earlier, past their prime, you know, like, so what the fuck do we do now? You know?
Yeah. And there's like, and we do get in the section that you read, Brian, is the sort of MacGuffin that sets this whole thing in motion. And this isn't to spoil things, but it is the tapes that Alexander Bleach makes of his like last will and testament while he's staying with Vernon. And Vernon has those tapes, and now that he's dead, there will be cause to want those tapes. Like, he even references later on in the part that you wouldn't be able to read that he could sell them for money, and that's something that he could sell. They're like 3-hour-long tapes about Alexander's life and what he saw and was involved with as a super mega pop star.
Well, that's that too, right? With there's certain things that he just can't bear to part with, like whether it's some posters or box sets or something. Like, there's certain things that are just like, I can squeeze by, but this stuff I just have to. These have to stay.
Yeah, I'm not giving up my Twin Peaks: The Return.
Exactly.
Even if it means I have to live on the street drinking ramen out of a trash can. Like,
the John Waters VHS tapes stay. Everything else can go.
All out. But the other thing I didn't notice, because I didn't know the whole thing of it, but I'm just going to plant here as an idea, is that Alexander's talking a lot about the music making and not making, he can't write songs anymore, but is instead all about like these waves and changing people's mind through like this kind of group class change of things through the musical tones and the theta waves and the alpha waves and whatever else. And all that stuff is also another seed, I think.
It's interesting that Vernon has a comment during that section where he's like, I thought when he first started talking about that, fine, if you want to make hippie music, that's on you. You know, and it was interesting reading that this time, because his attitude may or may not change about some of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's funny, it just goes right past it. And that's the fun thing about rereading like this kind of stuff too, when it's like 3 volumes, is there's very little subtle things. Another thing is like the power structures. It's always about the power structures between artists and who puts out the art. Like, that happens with Bleach, but then it's going to happen, like, again, in the section read today that's later than you got, Brian, between the screenwriter and the producers. Like, it's always like a sort of pulling between the artist and the publishers or whatever. Which is kind of how this fits in with JR. Is that relationship between commerce and art as well, and like what gets crushed. And that's very true in Pretty Things, the earlier book, is like the twin that becomes a pop star. Her sister was like wanting to be like a porn star, pop princess sort of thing, but couldn't really sing, but like used her body to like be that vibe. And so when her twin sister takes over, who has never been like that, she gets like eaten alive. Like, the system tries to destroy her. And it is very much that, like, and this has become a recurring theme of late with like that Saving Britney TV show and everything, of like the way that women are discussed, pop women or artistic women, and specifically in the early 2000s was like pretty rough and like really did a lot of damage to like both them as individuals and like the presentation of female artists. And that's comes through in here too. I really like this book. We should talk about the Xavier section, because Brian, you said beforehand that you're like, well, I don't know what would be offensive or like what would be shocking about any of this.
From what I've seen, yeah, I don't know. Before we go to the offensive stuff, though, like that idea of like with JR or with a relic and being left behind and things changing, it kind of reminded me of like, for me, it is like the 90s and for like alternative music was very formative for me. And trying to imagine that existing today seems bizarre. Like, there's no way this could happen. Even like something like take music television. There used to be a thing called Liquid. I think it was called Liquid TV or Liquid Television, and it was late at night, and it was just weird shit. Just like totally fringe claymation, animation, weird stories. Like it was really neat, avant-garde, pushing the envelope. It was on TV, like oddly enough. Like, I mean, granted, it's, you know, midnight on, you know, some random cable television, you know, it wasn't primetime or anything, but like that kind of stuff does not exist anymore. It can't really exist anymore because it's almost like they weren't worried about making money. It was just about putting something different and new and weird out there. And like I really clinged on, like I really like clung to that. And then like new metal comes out, and like, you know, pop was always there, but then it's just more about the product and the and it's the same thing with like this CDs just ruined everything. Like this idea of like my records, like what's the point of having a record store anymore? Like my whole life doesn't matter anymore. It's gone. It's passed me up, but I don't want to let go of it.
I mean, it's kind of like the situation with bookstores at some level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
I wondered if you'd make that. I mean, because it's really easy to make that jump, you know, to thinking about that as well. You know.
I mean, we haven't adopted book reading wholesale in the way that people adopted digital music, but like, nevertheless, there are like so many people who love vinyl, and there's no reason to replace it. There's nothing to no need for it. And yet it then was replaced through, I mean, I guess there is, because it's portability questions, but like the book doesn't need to be replaced, but yet at the same time, we do feel like the culture has moved past. And as we say, like as we talk about books and put all of our lives into book writing and reading and discussing, but nevertheless, like I know what it's like when you say like my friends aren't readers, and like, yeah, I know how that goes. Like,
well, and everything's always trying to move recommendations to an algorithm,
yeah.
Which is the similar, you know, Spotify tries to tell me that I'll like this, but it's not the same as when I was going to record stores and somebody would. Yeah, I was really big into rap days. So I remember somebody putting Southern Playlistic Cadillac Music by Outkast in my hands, you know what I mean? And blowing my little mind, you know what I mean? Like, and that kind of thing. It's true with bookstores too. Like there's all kinds of sites and everything that want to change that from like readers talking and sharing stuff they love to like, oh, this can just be done through an algorithm.
It's like and it also seems to be like, there's this crazy book that I'm teaching in class next week. Hold on, let me grab it. This book, another French book called Fragments of an Infinite Memory, My Life with the Internet by Mel Renaud. I don't know, Renaud. And it's about like the relationship between like memory and the internet, and the way that things how that's altered like philosophically, the way that we treat a lot of different aspects. And one thing that you just remind me of from this book is that those algorithms are an attempt to replace like the localized specific knowledge with something that is grand. So you as a bookseller can't read every book, but the algorithm can. And so like the books that you could never recommend because you would never have read them, and this person might be the right one to have recommended to them, the algorithm can quote unquote pick up or pick out. And that the reliance on that as an idea or as a value is really upends the nature of like the artistic enterprise of the small coffee shop, the small bookshop, the small record store that has this like attitude. Like the idea of like, it seems bizarre in some ways to have like that snobby record store, you know, or bookstore stereotype from not that long ago. Like that feels like dangerous these days because everything is so kind of corporatized and like washed away, because that's not appealing when you can just get anything you want through Amazon or get an algorithm to do it.
It almost has to have that comic shop vibe.
Yeah.
Where everybody nerds out to a similar thing, and then you can maybe have it ordered in for you because you can't carry everything in stock. And then there's like this celebration of coming in to pick up the stuff you ordered and talking about it. And, you know, it's like like kind of that idea of a gathering place. But yeah.
Well, great bookstores used to have, and I'm sure some still do, they used to have the guy who knew everything about translated lit, or the guy who knew everything about whatever, the woman who knew all of noir, you know, like whatever it was. And so it was kind of like there really was a personal touch to it that like the snobby stuff got like, I remember High Fidelity kind of did that first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where they like kind of looked, you know, lampooned that or whatever. But now that it's gone, I kind of miss that. Like I miss the expert.
Could you imagine? Yeah, I think that like Tom Roberge embodies that to some degree in his interactions with the world. I hope he's not listening to us. But like in a good way. I mean this in a very positive way, but as like a representation of that. But I know that most people are more cautious. I feel like we're more cautious now for all the reasons that one should and shouldn't be. Like, sure, it shouldn't be offensive to people like mindlessly and without recourse, but also like people are just like, I don't want to do anything. Like one of the weirder words that comes up in here is fucktard. Fucktard feels like I have like just crossed a line saying that.
I'm curious if the translator comes on, how the translation of that worked out, actually.
He in King Kong Theory he uses fuckwits a lot, fuckwit, which I'm like, oh, I'm down for fuckwit a lot. Fucktard I love, but like I also do feel like I would probably not use that in public.
Yeah, pretty thin ice, but yeah, I'm curious how that works, translating it over. That'd be really interesting to know.
Yeah. Well, he does he has to translate it in a way too where the language is kind of at times like cheesy is not the right word, but the jargon that they're using in their head is not current because that has to be stuck also like 10 to 15 years back, like if Vernon and his friends are past their prime, then they're not going to say, the most current, whatever, when they're talking or whatever, they're going to sound that age.
They're going to sound of the past. Yeah.
Exactly. So some of it sounds a little silly to me. Like if it doesn't hit the right thing, like there's a lot of talk about a hot babe. Like, and that is not, I've never heard someone say hot babe.
To talk to him about the fact that he is a male translating this sort of voice as well, and that like hot babe is like maybe that's not a phrase that a female would have chosen.
Hot babe.
It
kind of reminds me of like the way like there's like a chef who still likes to use portobello mushrooms because that was like the ingredient to use in 1990, and the current chefs are like, seriously, portobello mushrooms? What are you 50? What is that?
This
was like a really good ingredient. This was the thing, man. You char these and you put stuff on top of it, and it's like, okay, great chefs, great cities, PBS, way to go, buddy. We're like, it's transgressive for 97 or whatever.
Oh my God. Chris Olson mentions in the chat that he grew up in the 70s and hot babes were everywhere. Get that. So the Xavier section, this is where he uses fucktards. And this is where like
that's other like a dreamboat.
What's that?
Calling a guy a dreamboat.
Oh my God.
Dreamboat. He's a real dreamboat. He's the
I would say like if someone called me a dreamboat, I'd be like, oh fucking I'll take that. Like that sounds awesome. Like, that's the greatest compliment you could ever give a human being.
I want to be a party boat or a jet ski.
Yes. Dreams are perfect because you don't even have to be there.
So the other part that's like related to what we're talking about is that goes through the lens of both her as the writer and him as the translator, is that each one of these characters, although there is an omniscient voice to it, there are words that are given over to them. They have their own sort of way of speaking that defines them. And this is where like she really runs up against being able to like include things that are incredibly offensive without it being a reflection on the author. And it's a way that like it feels, and I think that's why when we're talking about like why hasn't this blown up? Like it's popular, but it's popular among like a sort of set. It's not like this should be as big as like Bolaño in some ways. That's maybe saying too much, but like, or that's maybe going too far, but maybe not. Like, I don't know. I think it's very readable. It's very interesting. It's got a lot to say about society and stuff. It should really resonate, especially with like a focus on women's fiction. Wow, someone mentioned that fucktard was used a ton among gamers in the early 2000s, especially people who played Halo. So maybe that's a very specific reference. So
yes,
that's what we're here for. Give you those, bringing that little tidbit. But the characters, so like we're quick to judge. The internet is quick to judge books in which they determine the author is not representing things in the proper way, that the characters are not being transformed fast enough, that the characters embody things that are objectionable. And the characters in here 100% do. And like the way of her framing like the first person, third person, like dichotomy there of where it's in this third person tone and yet is so limited and in their mind and very much of them that we get their words and feels like there's a distance as if this person is being judged for their shittiness through without ever having to judge them. And I think that kind of protects it. But at the same time, I think that readers that are of the ilk that are looking for reasons to get upset or be offended by authors not making these choices, that this book might piss them off. They would avoid it because they're like, I'm uncomfortable. I want things that are comfortable. And I wonder if that exists, because the people I know who read this are people like us that aren't easily offended, and are more into the idea of like character versus an author being different things. But everyone I know that's a fan kind of falls in the same reading pattern in that regard. Maybe.
That's interesting. I don't know, because it's always the character and the characters are so different. I find it weird that people would put anything on her. I mean,
yeah,
I've never read anything else, and I don't know. I haven't read King Kong Theory, but I know of it. But let's say I hadn't seen that she's provocative in real life, which I believe she probably is. Well, what would you think of what her actual politics or whatever are? I mean, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, and nor would you even know. I mean, it's not like she's put herself into these characters. I mean, first off, the first two things we're reading today is all men that she's in, like, I mean, the women are all,
and she does have like, and I think that her representation of Amelia, is it Amelia, something like that?
Yeah.
Her representation of her is fascinating because she acknowledges that she's past her prime and has like her resentments about it. And like, I used to be like the bass player, and then our band broke up, and I figured someone else would want me to play, and they don't. Nobody asked me, and everything just kind of ended there. And now I'm gained a lot of weight, and like I don't look the same as I did, and everything's like a little bit harder than it used to be, and I'm living this kind of mundane life after having like this cool club experience. And that representation is like, I think, valid and interesting too, where it's not like making this person perfect or like they're the perfect like 40-year-old post bass player. They're like, I wish I didn't weigh like this. I wish I had sex differently. There's a lot of parts of King Kong Theory that are amazing. One that I won't ever forget is when she talks about the prostitutional contract, and she's like, if we accepted that some people are willing to have sex for money and some people are willing to pay for it, and that's fine, society won't want to do that because it'll undermine the fact that the marriage contract is so shitty and that women are just asked to sell themselves at rock bottom prices and not be able to use their pussy to like make money, that men don't want them to be able to use that for money. It's just to use it in a different way. And like, fuck yeah, like that's provocative, that's there, and it's not wrong in any way. So here's this section. So Xavier goes into the Monoprix supermarket and he's buying stuff for his wife. He's the one who's a screenwriter, but he's not really a great screenwriter. He seemingly is like a middle level person who reworks scripts that then are picked apart by younger, cooler people, producers who don't know anything about writing, and they never get made, but he gets enough money to like kind of keep going. And his wife is like a baroness and like kind of a more controlling figure within his section at least. But he's in there, he's in the Monoprix, and he says, now here in the, I'll just read this, but this is rough. And this is like this is where it is like hate speech. Yeah. Now here in the Monoprix, he wishes he had brought a bazooka. The fat blonde flashing her ugly thighs in a pair of tight shorts who dresses like she's a supermodel when actually she's just a cow, bullet in the head. The little ultra right-wing Catholic couple styled like couples with her retro glasses and her hair scraped back, and him with his pretty boy face and his Bluetooth headset making phone calls, are wandering around the aisles picking out only the most expensive items. Both of them wearing beige raincoats to show how they're true conservatives, bullet in the mouth. The fat piker staring at the women's asses while he picks out his halal meat, bullet in the temple. The yid in the fright wig with the repulsive tits that hang down to her belly button, he hates women with sagging breasts, bullet in the knee. Fire into the crowd. Watch the survivors scatter like rats and scuttle under the shelves. The little fucking rabble who come here to stuff their faces with their tendencies to lie, to con, to cheat, to jump the line, to bullshit. Below a lot of them to kingdom come. But he's a papa, he's a married man, he's a grown-up, so he keeps his mouth shut and fills his shopping cart, foaming at the mouth with rage. When he gets home, he will have to put everything away. Otherwise, Marie-Anne will sulk, and it will be one more day in which he gets nothing written. His jaws are aching from clenching his teeth.
So yeah, I mean that's the part. I mean that's I only put two flags or whatever in this part, and that was one of them. It's an incredible look at the male, very specifically male, anger that, I mean, I live in the southern suburbs. I imagine that's what most people I'm around at the grocery store are probably sitting there thinking, like,
oh, I have a story. This is a digression, but I need to tell this because Brian will know what I'm talking about specifically. I went to Salinger's on Monday to watch the terrible national championship game, which was maybe the boringest basketball game I've ever watched. And it was the first time I'd been like in a semi-normal bar since, last year and like whatever. And everyone's like pretty, spaced out. It's like a dive bar. Like it's the same 12 drunks always. Like it's not really like, it's not even really like, doesn't even seem weird because it's like, oh, yep, there's Jim. He's always there. And he's just drinking his whiskey. But then these two guys came in. And one of them had like a weird thing on his stomach, like a fanny pack looking thing, but it was odd. And they weren't wearing masks. And the bartender, tiny little dude, like smaller than I am, was like, you're out of here. You have to get out of here. You can't do that. And they're like, are you really giving us the shit because you're not wearing masks? And he's like, you can't be in here anyways. Like you're banned for life. Like you need to get out. And like they left. And I was like, this feels tense and uncomfortable. And like as they left and were staring through the window and like walking down, I was like, I don't feel good about this. And as it turns out, the bartender's like, you guys want to know why he got banned? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, he got kicked out of here because he got in a fight with someone. He went and tried to jump the patio fence, missed, landed, cut his balls open, was bleeding everywhere, and pulled out a gun from his pants and threatened everyone at the bar. And I was like, cool. I came to watch the Baylor destroy Gonzaga and die.
This is going to be a wild summer.
It's gonna be hot. I'm ready for the summer to be like all of that. But yeah, but that's what's the other part that you flagged? Like that's an offensive, clearly like, yeah, male violence.
It's the same. It's in the same shop, same page, or no, 52, and he's talking about the hijabs, which I don't know if I pronounce correctly. I never know if I do, but so we're seeing where I'm going to start it. Well, here he is doing the shopping instead of working because his wife does not want to be mistaken for a maid. And meanwhile, these lazy ragheads are strutting around while their jobless husbands don't do a damn thing, taking it easy, getting fat Social Security allowances, and spending their days sitting in cafes while their women slave away. If it wasn't bad enough that they do everything around the house without complaining and go out to work to support their husbands, they still feel the need to wear the veil to flaunt their submission. It's psychological warfare. They do it deliberately to make the French male realize how devalued he is. And it's that last part that really stays with me about he takes it as an affront to him. It's not about their religion, their beliefs, the way they want to live their life. It's specifically to you. I'm doing this to make the French male mad. You are the one put upon. And I think that is emblematic, it seems to me, of everyone, of any side sort of like take on the world, is that all of these things are awful and we're all mad and it's happening to me. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like I have plenty of lefty friends who I look at and I see Xavier and I think you two would get along.
Right.
Your anger is from the same place here. You've misdirect, it's so scattershot out into the world, but like the internal anger it's from the same thing.
And he gets balanced, his balancing point of like not being like, because he's clearly, and it's great when, I mean, there's so many interesting things about this book. Okay, so his balancing point is that he doesn't cheat on his wife, and which is like a weirdly like also very specifically French thing, because I think of every French male having a mistress, right? And they seem to like throughout this book, everyone's like, has had sex with everyone, or like it's not like there's no like taboo about things, and he's like, no, I'll never cheat on my wife, and that makes him a good person. And then you get the Vernon's reaction where he's like, when Vernon goes to stay with him, and he's like, well, Xavier started doing this crazy right-wing shit again, and like doesn't reply. Vernon's like, I just won't talk. Doesn't talk and doesn't respond to it because he knows that it's just going to lead down this rabbit hole of like more and more spiraling madness and insanity. So you have a character that has to turn to this person to stay at their house and dog sit for them because he has nowhere else to live. And it's like, this person's a piece of shit. Like, I know they're a piece of shit, but like, they're kind of my piece of shit. Like he'll take me out to the bar. His wife's very rich. Like he has a nice apartment. Like he'll buy me drinks. This is perfect. So like it's interesting like how the kind of line of where like the morality and the ethics are for these different people gets both refracted through others viewpoints on them, and also how Virginie Despentes herself always tries to make things not one or the other. He can't be completely bad. He can't be completely good. He can't be like just a conservative racist piece of shit. He's a conservative racist piece of shit who actually tries to do good in his own twisted way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that the part you read where if you notice, the things that he's noticing are what people look like and what they're wearing. And then he wants to shoot each one based off of what they look like, what they're wearing. Whereas like she does almost the complete opposite and gives everyone a full accounting. Like, this is what this person is completely like, you know. Now it gives you their awful stuff too, but it like invites you to actually get to know people you otherwise, you know, she meant, like in Brian's part, mentioned the bubble, you know, and like this kind of blows up that idea of the bubble and saying like, no, this is what everyone out here is like all like that you're staying away from because it's not in your scene or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does give you the chance to like, I mean, it's one of the great things about art, as one would say, of being able to see into someone else's world. But this book really writes that large in the sense that like it keeps putting you into these places and into these mindsets. Like as we get into more of the female characters as 3 male readers, that one will be very strong. But even here, like she starts with the Vernon, who's really like pleasant, and then she goes to Amelia, who's like sort of sad, and then Xavier, who's like horrid, and like comes off right away being like guns blazing, literally. Like talking about shooting up a supermarket is something that I don't think you usually get away with these days. Like you can't sympathize with that character, and this is where I fear that like one of the reasons that these books are like Acker-like in my world is because they're sort of divisive.
Yeah, he does that thing too, where like
uncomfortable.
Like Xavier does that thing where he says, "I'm not an anti-Semite, but if it was up to me, like we would just napalm all those countries."
Yeah, he's like napalm Lebanon, napalm Israel, napalm all of them.
And meanwhile, you're like, "What do you think, Xavier, that an anti-Semite?" You know what I mean? Like, it does go to like our whole thing about like you can't be that. Like, I know absolutely people I grew up with that would give the whole "I'm not racist" whatever, and then say the most racist thing you could imagine. You know what I mean? Like, but there is something about not being labeled that.
Yeah, that's always the worst thing to ever hear. I'm not racist, but I'm like, oh, I don't want to hear what's next.
What's coming next? Is it fly?
I'm not
racist, but fucktard might be an okay word. Like, no, Chad, it's not. Stop saying it. You're making us uncomfortable. Oh man. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, Brian, when you get to read the whole thing, you're gonna really get into it. And like that last part, so the last part goes back to Vernon. We've gone through everything except for Amelia, actually. Sort of skipped over her, except to say that she was like sort of sad because her part's very short.
Her part's short. The one thing I remember well from that is she is very jealous about the way men age versus women age physically. And I remember that part pretty well.
Where is it? It's somewhere right here.
I'm curious if we could put a pin at some point, probably not just yet, but maybe when we read book 2 and we circle back. I am curious about if we think there'll be a trend of more kind of muckraking and transgressive literature in like a pendulum swing of like with people being afraid of being canceled or saying something offensive or really showing the warts of who people are, whether it's misogyny or racism or all of it. Do you think we'll be seeing more of this? Will there be publishers that want to publish this or writers that want to write this as a way of pushing against what's kind of the cultural norm for literary fiction?
This is no offense to FSG whatsoever. Like, they're a very respectful company, great publisher. Everyone who works there is fantastic. But I don't think they put a lot of eggs in this basket. I think that they pushed like other books that came out far more that were far less this. Like you'd said, Derek, right before, and like, why isn't there a Spotify playlist for this? Which I actually had thought of, because I was like, well, for the music for this season will be easy. Like whatever gets referenced, I can just pull up. And there should be like a Riot Girl / that era rock, Spotify playlist promoting this. There should be like more. There's a lot that you could do with it. And unfortunately, it doesn't feel like that. I feel like I'm really dissing like the sales and reception of this book may be astronomically higher than anything I'm aware of. I just feel like there are other books that they've put more weight into that I do hear a lot more people talking about than this. And I question why. As someone who is like, we talk about like going in and getting recommendations. It wasn't recommended, but when I went to Tower Records as a college student, we'd go every Friday or every Tuesday to buy new albums because they used to come out on Tuesday, and we'd go buy stuff at midnight. And they had like a book section in Tower Records that was like very punk, very like edgy, very like druggy, Tim Leary, psychedelic, and that's why I started buying Kathy Acker books. And so I associate that scene with this writing, and I feel like I'm out of time as well. Like I'm fucking way past my prime. I'm so far past my prime that my prime is like has its own children now. There is something, I don't know what I was saying, but there's that sort of like punk attitude, and the like curation of that was so interesting. And I feel like even with the opportunity to do that, I don't know that they seized it in the way that I would hope they would to generate what you're describing, Brian. Like if there's going to be a swing back, I feel like this would have been a good ball to push down that side of the mountain. Instead of being like, we really like this. Here it is.
Yeah.
Don't talk about school shootings. Don't talk about supermarkets.
Well, because like there's obviously, it's especially if it gets pushed up to the front, it's going to cause controversy.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's very uncomfortable, and if it's uncomfortable, then it has to be bad, right? Even if you get the complete point of what the author's trying to do or what they're actually trying to showcase, it's.
And even though I don't find it in any way uncomfortable or weird, I think that the relationship to and attitudes towards sex in this book are probably uncomfortable for some people.
Okay.
I think that they're uncomfortable for people who it's targeting in a weird way. Like, I think that, okay, this is a whiskey statement. I think that some of the people that are reading this book that are like of my age are so conditioned that like the ideas about sexuality within this book are not good with them. However, they're exactly the sort of people that it's aimed at, and exactly the sort of people who shouldn't be in that position, who came after like the free love generation and everything, and had more open ideas about like power structures and the way that like marriage functions and doesn't, and hinders things, and various sexual ideas. But it's like that generation got a little bit too conditioned and fucked. And it's like my daughter's generation who is like, we don't give a shit about anything. Like they're the ones who are like free and like, and more open, and it speaks to them, but it's directed towards characters who are us.
Yeah.
It's that Miley Cyrus. She's always out there with her tongue out. Miley Cyrus can't put a shirt on without her tongue out with those little basic tattoos everywhere.
I thought about women. Oh wait, where'd it go?
With her TikToking,
motherfucking TikTok.
There's also this thing too where it's like your identity is not the views that you have. Like you'll be introduced that way. You'll be introduced with your views or whatever they are, political, social, but whether they are appropriate for the day, culturally and socially decided, or whether they are inappropriate, that is not your entire identity. And I think we are hopefully coming out of a phase where that was identity. I mean, identity was which boxes do you check and how are you represented?
My students in my class this semester in my lit class are like amazing in discussing this in like nuanced and interesting ways, and not reactionary in that like, I want to be in this box. They're very much more past that. It's really interesting. I found that one line. I want to read it because the one that you mentioned, Derek, just because I think it's interesting as a counterpoint to this in a way. Women evolve with age. They try to understand what is happening to them. Men stagnate heroically, then suddenly they regress. The older they get, the more love and sex are linked to childhood. And like that, I think is like a cutting, perfect sort of remark, and really does like define her as a character, but also defines sort of this viewpoint on like as you're talking about like how men age. This is a very specific aspect of that. But I have a favorite line that I don't want anyone to steal.
Okay.
So I'm taking it. This is from page 80. Past the age of 40, everyone is like a bombed out city. I marked it. I was like, yes, I am Beirut.
I resemble that remark. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite line, Derek? And Brian, you can if you have one, but I know you didn't get to see the whole thing.
Yeah, the last sentence of page 36. He doesn't hold it against her. He knows sometimes people go batshit crazy. And I think that sums up Vernon's like, and maybe her, the authors too, like take on it. Like, you know, you see that person you haven't seen in 10 years and they're just awful. And you're like, fuck it. Life sucks.
Yeah. Whatever, man. Some shit happens.
Yep.
I can't judge them. Anyway, okay, so I don't remember where we go to next week, but there is a link that I'll include in the show notes for the next week's reading schedule. It's probably to page 146 if I'm just making a guess here. But I'll link to it in the notes, and we will be back next Thursday to talk more about Vernon Subutex. Anything you guys want to recommend or plug? Or Derek, where can people find your writing? You got a lot going on now.
I have a little bit going on now, but I don't know where to find it. I go back and forth between wanting to be read and then wanting to wait until I'm somewhat good. But I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Always want to be read. Don't worry about being good.
Yes.
Brian, anything you want to?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Solid. Solid. I don't think I have anything either, except that baseball's back and I love it.
Stay safe and love your neighbor. Be a good person. That's all I want to put out there.
Put in the world the general kindness.
Stop being an asshole and just be nice to each other. We can do this. Come on.
Fact. Also, baseball's back and I love it. And this is good. This is like a full year of full normal baseball. So get ready. Everyone who's watching this for the next 3 months, it's just going to get worse. Much, much worse.
I got your back. It's not going to happen.
No, baseball's not going to happen in Georgia. That's correct.